Hey, Pulse Bodies. We at Pulse Pod are hitting the road. Well, actually, I am. George is going to Greece again, so George won't be there. But let's just say one half of the podcast duo, that is me and George, I am hitting the road with Dr. Charlotte Blees of Dr. Bot book fame. Many of you would have heard our interview with Charlotte last year, and I think we were the very first interview that she did. But since her book came out, it has become a global sensation. So Charlotte is joining us down under in Australia, and we would love to see you at an event we are holding in Sydney. Please get your tickets now. They won't last long. On Tuesday, the 3rd of March at 6 p.m, we will be talking all things AI and digital health with Dr. Charlotte Blees at Glebe Books in Glebe. And for those of you based in Melbourne, Tuesday the 10th of March at 6:30 p.m, Charlotte and I are going to be having a very cool conversation about all things AI and healthcare at Mary Martin Bookshop in Southbank. So tickets for both shows, you can get them online now. See the show notes for a link to where to get those tickets. I hope many of you can join us. It's an opportunity to not just meet Charlotte, but have a book signed by her as well. So on behalf of Charlotte and I, we look forward to seeing you. Okay, now on with the show. Hello and welcome to Pulse Amplify, where we sit down with the leaders and changemakers shaping the future of health. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
So today on Pulse, we are joined by Grahame Grieve, one of the most influential global figures in digital health. And I sort of feel like that statement is me underselling Grahame. Grahame is best known as the creator of FHIR, FHIR meaning Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. That's the standard that underpins much of modern health data exchange around the world. Grahame's a long-time HL7 leader, an architect, a developer, a truly deep thinker, and someone who has shaped not just the technical direction of interoperability, but the culture and the philosophy behind it. Grahame works internationally across governments, vendors, and health systems, and is known for having both an extraordinary technical mind and a very human view of how technology actually lands in clinical care. Grahame, it's such a pleasure to have you with us in the studio, well overdue. So welcome to Pulse Amplify.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here and thanks for having me. But I have got to tell you, all of that beat up, I am privileged to lead a very big community, and lots of those actually are attributes of the community. I just bask in the glory of the community.
You are being very modest there, Grahame, but it's great to have you on board.
Well, Grahame, let me start with that comment, because you're right. They are attributes of the community globally. But as someone who sits at the centre of that and was indeed one of the early leaders, how do you go about establishing that culture and organisational practice is a beautiful community to be part of, but they actually get shit done? How did you do that? That doesn't happen by accident.
No, and I have to acknowledge really good mentors. When I was at Kestrel, Kevin Moynihan said, you have all the technical skills, but man, you need people skills. And had a sustained program of forcing me to learn that, which is painful, but I did. And then I had a mentor, Kim Cloesy, who passed away, but was a real leader in IT. And he taught me community. And in a sense, I was just iterating on the template that he laid out for me. But I think the most important thing is to understand that community actually is what matters.
Yeah.
And I would keep that as my North Star. And whatever I do, it's not me, it's the community. And so we will serve and build the community to the best of our ability and just keep doing that. And there's a huge appetite for sharing healthcare data and doing that more effectively than we were. And as soon as you open the way, everyone piles in and wants to be on it. And I think the leaders in the FHIR community, we've always felt like we are running as fast as we can to keep ahead of the bus. And then the other thing is you have to justify through transparency and trust that people give you that trust and let you build the community. And from my point of view, integrity and transparency are paramount.
So this is very values driven for you, isn't it? Having known you as long as I have, I couldn't imagine you doing anything that you felt would compromise your values.
Oh, look, you need to make hard decisions and make trade-offs. But in the end, yeah, you have to say, if you're going to have a leadership in a community like this, there's things that you can't compromise on. And we've seen other C open source communities fall apart because the leaders compromised one way or another. So you know that it's a short path to destruction if you're not careful.
I just wanted to build on that, Grahame. The development of the FHIR community has been an evolution. And going back to your sort of my genre, where we're back before the turn of the century, what got you involved in actually looking at healthcare data standards? Why was it important back then? What was the business case for doing it back in the 1980s, 1990s? And how did that evolve now to a community where it's become more than just technical standards for messaging?
When I was in the lab, Kestrel's system was super frustrating because it had this enormous amount of data, but it was siloed, hard to work with. And I was doing a PhD and needing to do that. And it was really hard. And when the PhD money ran out, Kestrel offered me a job. And so I took the job at Kestrel with the express intent of making data more available to support research and operational efficiency. And then I found out just how hard it is. Hard within the product and hard across the products. And I sought opportunities for getting involved in data interoperability and then discovered how broken the community was. And I found that I enjoyed the community involvement. And so the interest grew from there. Now we can look at this and say, every dollar you spend on healthcare is a dollar not spent on growing your GDP. You can't compromise the health of your people because that will compromise your GDP. But every dollar you spend is wasted in terms of economics. So you want to spend less money without sacrificing health. All the paths that lead to that are better use of data as a precondition for figuring that out. And better use of data means better data, better interoperability standards. So from where I sit, if we want better economic outcomes, we want better political outcomes, we want people to be happier, we need better healthcare data interoperability and a better community to make that happen.
No, I think that's really important. So HL7's gone through many iterations. Your experience going through those iterations of the community, have you seen highs and lows in that process?
Sure, we just started a drive for FHIR. HL7 had wound itself into a position where it was firmly committed to an unsustainable pathway. The strategy wasn't working. And the organisation did a review, like organisations do, and doubled down on the unworkable strategy, thinking that execution would make it work better. I mean, political parties do this all the time, right? Double down on it.
Yep.
And I just said no, and I was going to do something else. And I was very lucky that the organisation was prepared to have an internal insurgency, which is effectively what we did, and a palace revolution. Other organisations don't have the vitality to survive that and have to kill that organisationally. And so kudos to Chuck, who was the CEO at HL7. I mean, if we look at it purely social terms, it was an insurgency. The powers that be fought back, and Chuck said, no, we want the insurgency to happen inside HL7, not outside, and protected us and fostered us. And in the end, we became HL7, and all of the other things are just curios in the past now. It was organisational bravery to take that path.
So that there's lessons there for lots of organisations and possibly a few countries as well.
Absolutely. I think the hardest thing in leadership, and I think about this a lot, is you're going to make that call. Is the strategy the problem or is the execution the problem? Execution can always be better and maybe you should. But at what point do you say, no, the strategy is the problem, it's time to change? And I've changed course a couple of times on FHIR on smaller things. And I think that's the hardest part of leadership, is make that call.
And Grahame, what about when you're living through all of that? Because it's one thing to look back and go, this is what happened. And yes, it was hard and challenging. It was worth it. This is where we've come. But when you're living through it, did you know it would be successful, or what drove you? Because you don't usually know these things, and it takes guts and determination and a real commitment to continue in the face of adversity.
Yeah, totally. It was a very emotional experience. And a couple of years into the work, an XKCD cartoon came out where it's talking about there's going to be one standard to unify everything. No, we're just going to have another standard of being a mess. And we worried about that. And standards actually higher failure rate in startups. And so, yes, it was a very big deal and was really, is this going to be worth it? And if you're going to set out on a path like this, you need a standard that's an order of magnitude easier to work with or bigger bang. It can't just be marginal improvement. And yeah, we did worry about it. And a lot of the early cost came out of our mortgage. And so it was a very personal commitment in that regard.
Yeah, so it's been your family's journey too, not just yours.
Right. In the family, we believe that people should get better healthcare. We want better healthcare. Everybody I ever talk to has experienced in their own family the consequences of the chaos of the healthcare system in terms of bad treatment and so forth, and morbidity and mortality. It happens to all of us. And everyone in the system tries as hard as they can, but the system itself is the fog of war. And we believed that as a family, it was an ethical commitment that I made with my family, that I made to my family as part of being a father, is teach your children how they should live. And so we had the opportunity and the obligation to give it our best shot. That's how it came about, really.
And then you get to where we are now, and FHIR has gone from an idea, a very revolutionary idea at the time, to not just a community, but global infrastructure. So when you look at where FHIR sits today, what surprises you most about how it's been adopted or how it's used?
The biggest surprise was how political the adoption was, how involved the governments were. I had this mental model, at least, and I think we shared it, that it would just happen organically at the vendor level. And it's probably stupid, naive thing that we thought. But no, I constantly get brought in by the advisors to the minister level around the world because it's a political choice to drive this or not. And some countries have driven it and are starting to get the benefits while others have not. So probably the biggest surprise is just how political it is to get involved at that. And we thought actually adoption would naturally arise faster. And I think that was dumb because we were just like, well, it's technically better. It's going to work. And because that's just not how human societies work. So probably that is the thing that stands out to me.
Yeah. And not just governments. I remember years ago when Apple first announced they were going to play in healthcare, FHIR was a part of it and has continued to be part of it ever since. Did you expect that to happen? There's one thing for a technology vendor that sits within the healthcare ecosystem to be aware of FHIR, to be involved and to champion its use, but to have large technology companies also come to the party and recognize its brilliance, and not just brilliance, but actually this is a wise commercial decision for them.
I mean, it was a process with Apple, not a surprise. Apple recognised that the healthcare system is bigger than they can take on directly. So it was a good choice that they made to choose to work with the system as part of the system. But I think one of the more tangible evidences of the transformation that FHIR's led to is if you go back 15, 20 years ago and you look at the strategies of all of the big IT companies, their strategies were all, we have to build a vertical. We have to own a vertical. And it's a big struggle to build a vertical app in healthcare. It's a 10 to 15 year process. You're not going to get profitable till the year 10 unless you're super lucky. And you have to have sustained commitment and investment to do that, which is why so few companies can enter healthcare. You grow up in healthcare because you go through that phase before you know what you're doing business-wise. It's the only way it ever happens. And Microsoft and Alcatel and Cisco, whatever, the board would look at it 5 to 7 years and go, this is a huge risk. What are we doing? And pull the cash. And everyone knows that's going to happen. So it's super hard to enter healthcare. But that's what they were doing. They were entering healthcare by building a vertical.
I can relate to that. I was one of the people in that journey back in the early 2000s. The one thing that really surprised me, because back late 2000s, early 2010s, when you go to HIMSS over in the United States, FHIR was everywhere. And yet you'd come back over here to Australia. And even though we knew its origins were here, and those of us who knew the history, we didn't see much FHIR here in Australia. Now, we've seen that massively change over the last couple of years. From your perspective, what was that like, watching success bloom in countries like the United States? And like you pointed out, a lot of that was politically driven, and there was the timing of the things like the Accountable Care Act and all those sort of things drove a lot of those activities. But watching Australia be a slow follower of an innovation which came from our own shores, how does that make you feel?
It was a grind. But see, the transformation is absolutely political. And you see that as organic in the United States, but there was White House behind that. And the Argonaut thing was initiated by the White House to get the US vendors to work together. And then the transformation is complete. And the big vendors, now they're entering healthcare in their niche rather than trying to build a vertical. That's the transformation. It didn't happen here in Australia. And there was a few reasons. One was I decided to work on FHIR because I saw how the PCHR was playing out, that it was going to fail to deliver on the vision that the politicians and the doctors had because the standards weren't there. And I was like, you have to build the standards to get there. There's no other way. But I started building it right after it was too late for the PCHR to do anything about that. That was a source of internal frustration for the agency because they were committed. They couldn't change course. But everybody knew that the course was wrong. That's a bad place to be in. Australia was like maximally handicapped in that regard, right, because of the timing. And so then you have this 7-year process of finishing out what you were doing, knowing that you can't adopt a new tech. And then we had the Senate inquiry. What's the PCHR? And I testified to the Senate inquiry and said, the PCHR is an enormous achievement, but we need to build on it. We need to keep going. And the Senate's response was, we spent the money, just make it work without money. Of course we were doomed. And we sat in a loop for another 7 years because of that Senate decision. What could you do? Nobody could do anything. And then Mark Butler came along and said, no, I would change the game. And that was what we were waiting for, a minister who said, no, I care about infrastructure. I'm going to take the risk of changing the game. So all kudos to the minister for that. Suddenly, we got a whole bunch of action.
Oh, that's right. Yes. And Australia is leading the world. I've just come back from overseas. And while I was in the UK, I had 2 meetings with people going, all right, we want to have Sparked here. Can you hook me up? Who do we talk to? Can you get me this information? It's fabulous to see that community is making such an impact globally in terms of how the community works and how that Sparked community, with the support of our federal government and indeed our health minister, is making waves globally, even though their remit is Australia. Well, time for a quick break. But when we're back, we are going to be talking with Grahame about all things AI and getting his thoughts on just how disruptive AI is going to be. Also, if you are thinking of procuring an EMR now, what should you do? Grahame has thoughts. And we also ask Grahame, what's the conversation that we need to be having in digital health that we are not having? So let's talk about AI, Grahame. Recently on Pulse, George and I discussed our initial thoughts on the moves by the big AI giants into healthcare, specifically the direct-to-consumer models like ChatGPT Health. So as someone who works with big tech and global governments, what are your thoughts on where we're heading? And do you see this as massively disrupting?
I think it is going to be massively disrupting, both good and bad. I have personal family experience in the last year of bad diagnoses that just made me despair. Like, what was the doctor thinking? I checked with ChatGPT and Claude, and they're both like, what? No. And so good decision support from an AI to go, hang on, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you thinking about this? Would have saved a life, actually, in my family.
Oh, God.
Or at least given the person another 3 or 4 years anyway. The quicker you respond, the bigger the difference. And so we desperately need good interop, good integration, so that those services which already know an enormous amount of stuff and are really good at context can be brought to bear. And the same for patients. As a patient, you should totally now be getting all your data, feeding it to ChatGPT or to Claude or to whatever, and then taking that to your doctor as your own second opinion. What about this? What about that? You should be doing that now because medicine is complex, biology is complex, the system is under pressure all the time to do as much as possible for as little cost as possible. That's what we want as taxpayers. And so everybody's compromised in the system. The system isn't what it should be, and that's because we choose to pay, but we can't afford to pay what it could be. And so your hedge against that is using AI now to not tell you the answers, but to tell you the questions. It's still not reliable enough to give you the answers, but it is reliable enough now to give you the questions.
Yeah.
I code with Claude all day, every day, and they are picking up really quickly. So soon it will be better. It's a fact that we've got to face. Soon, diagnosis will be better by AI. What it doesn't yet have, although it's not bad, is the human touch.
Yeah.
But what is the role then? How does that impact on the system? The system is not ready for this. The system, the people, it's our lives on the line, our livelihoods on the line. We're not ready for the change that this will bring. What will happen is health will be protected. This is enormous vested interest, both financially and emotionally, in protecting our healthcare system.
Yeah, as the way it's currently structured and what we choose to fund and what we choose not to fund.
Yeah, so our system will protect itself from getting bettered, because getting bettered will be traumatic. And, take the GPs. 80% of a GP's work, 70 maybe, is churn, right? We already know that AI can do the churn better than a GP. What we want GPs to do is what they like doing, which is the health coaching, literacy, management of the system. That's what we need them to do.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do. But they are utterly against turning the churn over to AI because the churn is their profit.
Yeah. Your words are music to our ears. We've been having this discussion on the podcast. It's the beginning, the role of enablement and the role of technology to enable people. And always that comparison with what our idealized model of healthcare is and what the reality is. And you're right, that 70% churn, which is the level B consults, which pay the bills and keep the practice running, that change in model of care is really important. Patient enablement, we've been a big fan of this in the beginning. So patients using ChatGPT, just this morning I was listening to a podcast by Norman Swan, and there was that classic paternalistic, the patients may not know what to do with the information. How do we enable patients to, build on their health and digital literacy and make these tools more usable for them so they can actually use it as that first step? You and I can go to our doctor with a ChatGPT because we've got a background in healthcare, but the bulk of the population don't have that background. What are the things we need to do to make that more available for them?
That is a great question. Maybe the $1 million question for everybody today. I mean, before the internet, remember the ignorance we lived in before the internet? Everything is at the touch of a finger. Everything, every piece of human knowledge is available. How do we deal with that? So already we're talking about toasting secondary, tertiary education. What's the point? The thing you need to do is to jump across information and judge. And that's what we have to teach. Because tech skills, they're meaningless now. Like, I've never ever done a deployment to Docker, but yesterday I did it. No, I didn't do it. I just said, hey, Claude, do this for me. But I did need to know what I was trying to do and why. And when Claude gave me a piece of bad advice, enough to go, actually, no, that doesn't make sense. And it's that judgment that we need to start teaching hard, because everything is changing under our feet. But we need to have a good conversation of what actually is the ideal health model, because it's completely changed in the last 2 years. The way I was thinking about where health should go is irrelevant 2 years later because of AI. Everything has changed. And so where is the value? This is going to be hard. And people are resistant to this change. One of the things is what question you're asking. We're already at the point where we hate self-driving cars. This is a terrible idea. Could you possibly trust an AI to drive? Well, I mean, what's your question? Are you talking about comparing it to humans? Like humans driving cars, really? And we're like, well, they get drunk, they get distracted, they get angry. Machines don't do this. It's what your level of comparison is. They're like, yes, you may occasionally get bad advice from an AI about your health. Well, you never get bad advice from a doctor or a nurse about your health. Well, that never happens. We have a healthcare system that's going to protect this existing structure against change, because we don't like change, and humans are all the same on that. And that's just going to drive more and more system skepticism as the system doesn't change. And it's going to happen. It's going to be really hard to get your data, and to feed good data to the system is not going to help you do this. It's going to do it very slowly and reluctantly. I see all those things, resistance happening, and that's just going to make it worse. And for me, the major challenge that we have is a social challenge that will play out in health, which is legitimacy. It's batten down the hatches. The next 10 years is going to be rough.
So possibly the lessons from HL7 of managing the insurgency internal may come in handy at a broader level as well.
Yeah, one of the things that you learn from history is that when the going gets tough, the tough get into politics. The big people, I'm not saying nice people, but most of the time when they get into politics together, it's a waste of time. But when things are really hitting the wall, then the really big people get into politics, which tells you just how well things are going right now as a corollary to that. I hope that within a few years, we will realise we are in a mess. This is one of those times when society is about to hit the wall and really big thinkers will get into politics and start really pushing. Mark Carney is pretty impressive in that regard.
Yes, star of Davos.
Yep. Now, maybe that is just a flash in the pan, but no, he's looking pretty interesting as a thinker.
And he only got the job really because of Trump, because Trump turned out to be so toxic, and the guy who was leading in the polls in Canada was too aligned to Trump.
It's interesting. And yeah, again, this goes obviously beyond health technology, but from a philosophical perspective, you're right. We saw recently the Nuclear Scientists Association move the doomsday clock to 5 seconds closer to doom. So we really are in a crisis situation. Hopefully that will drive things. Does that mean people like yourself may consider those roles, Grahame?
Oh, no, I'm happy doing the work that I'm doing. For me, although we're bedding down what we are, the easy thing that could come with bedding down what we are is bedding down our aspirations and saying, done. But we are very far from done. Most of our challenges are how we relate to the wider world, the other parts of the ecosystem, in building out a much more seamless, holistic view of what we're about. And one of the things that I hope very much that we've always prioritized is if you can get open source agreements, if you can get those agreements published openly, then they can't be used as weapons to camp on IP and use patents to prevent competition or drive profit or refuse to share data and keeping people trapped, organizations trapped. We've always systematically eradicated that wherever we have the ability to do so. There's still a few of them trying to do this thing, but there's hardly any because we priorited everything in public. And I'm really hoping that will prove to be a discipline for AI companies. They really like that we're there, that we're making data available through FHIR, that they can start leveraging up the pressure on the system, and all power to them for that. But also, it's going to be really hard for them to camp on the data. But I think they're going to try, because how else are they going to pay back the immense capital that's been invested in them? One thing that's interesting, the AI is evaporating the value of invested applications. It's not evaporated yet, but it's evaporating them. You could have $1 billion company and then someone could go, oh, over the weekend, I used Claude to write something that does exactly what you do. Done. I just give it away because Claude did it over the weekend. And you thought you had $1 billion product. This is not quite where we are yet, but it's coming. We can see it. And so what will they do in healthcare, where I said at the start of the conversation, 10 or 15 year time frame to build a vertical? Maybe it's going to change. Maybe it's going to go to 1 or 2 years. Maybe there's a SaaS product, and this is part of what we've been working on, is to make it possible to have a standards-based SaaS product that's undercutting the existing vendors by a factor of 100. Maybe that's, and there are people working on that, but maybe with AI, that's around the corner.
Yeah.
And the world that we're going to be in 2 or 3 years' time, where there is realistic SaaS offerings that can do this.
Okay, so fast forward 5 years, 3 years, and there's more availability, more options, more fabulous products out there that can help us in the healthcare system. That doesn't change the business models of healthcare and what we choose to procure and how we procure it. If you are government, executive of a hospital, changing how you procure is really scary. And those types of organisations prioritise avoidance of risk over anything. What's your advice to people in those roles? How can they help improve their own systems while still managing the risk in this new world?
You know, my advice to a state recently that are trying to procure an EHR is don't. Of course, they can't not do it because the process gives its own logic. As a hospital, you can say, I'm not going to do an EDS-based 9-figure procurement of an EHR when I can get one off the shelf, a SaaS one. That's not a hard decision to make after someone else made it first.
Yeah.
So it's the matter, it's like zero. You start at the bottom of the market and you work up, and it can go pretty quick. The discussion that we need to have is the bigger one, not around how you procure your IT systems, but around how we actually change the system for IT, given that IT is digital as eating everyone's lunch. And I don't know the answer to that, but I know that we're not seriously having the discussion. I haven't heard any serious discussion about what should we want the healthcare system to look like. What is it that we want from healthcare?
I think that's a really great point. We keep on talking about transforming the healthcare system, but the transformation isn't just making the messages go faster from point A to point B, but actually understanding how those messages can be used to deliver better services.
Yeah, the real benefit of digital health is not making the existing systems marginally more effective by improving your communications. It's by making systems of care that can't happen able to happen. When you discharge a patient from a hospital, instead of saying you can come back less often, you could say there's no reason for you to come back for follow-up care because we're going to give you an app and we're going to watch you every day. And we will check on you, not once a week. We'll check on you every day. And we'll stay on top of things. And we already have systems like that running in some parts of the world. And the patients like them, the staff like them, less morbidity and mortality, less cost, higher throughput. We can build those systems today. But it's still a special niche thing to actually build such a system like that post-surgery. That's insane. If you get all those 5 things, why isn't everybody doing that?
Yeah, the variability is a massive challenge. That can happen within the same walls of a physical building. One department, you can have 5 different specialists in the same field who will all practice their craft differently and treat you differently. That's insane.
I totally recommend reading anything written by Atul Gawande about this subject.
Yeah.
Even some of the work by Jeffrey Braithwaite and the team over at Macquarie University looking at the lack of standardization of just basic healthcare delivery. Someone's at high risk of heart disease, give them a statin. Even that only happens 60% of the time, even though the evidence has been there for decades. I guess this sort of goes to our last question. What are the conversations in digital health that we aren't having? And I think we've sort of raised that very much. It's not digital health, it's the whole healthcare system conversation we need to be having.
Grahame, it's been fabulous. Thanks so much for your generosity in time and coming onto the show today and for sharing some of the history, but also what you're working on now as part of a community. For all listeners of the show today, these conversations that we aren't having, that we need to be having, we don't have to wait for government to convene a national summit for that. You can start these at a very local and personal level and create change that way. Would you agree, Grahame?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I usually say at the end of a talk like this is we all like living in a civil society. Much preferable to the alternative, but a civil society is built out of us behaving civilly, which means getting involved. So get involved, have the discussions, have them as groups, believe in the system, because for all its faults, it's better than the alternative.
I think that's a great point. And like you said, the need for ongoing discussion is important. And Grahame, to your credit, you've played a very active role in that over the decades that I've known you, from taking us from very simple HL7 XML messaging to the idea of health information as a cultural component of our whole healthcare system. So thank you very much for the great work you've done. Looking forward to what are your plans for the future and as far as this goes?
At the moment, I'm focused, we have a new CEO in Rachel at HL7. Really.
Yes. Very exciting.
One of our very early interview guests, I have to say. So we foresaw the future.
I'm looking forward to working with Rachel to finish this and starting to think about what I might take on as the next challenge. But probably won't be so big. I don't have the same energy that I used to have.
Allow more time to go and explore the outback of Australia.
Although now in Starling days, it doesn't matter where I am anymore.
Yeah.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing more of your adventures going forward, Grahame.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Grahame. Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Emily Marr at Pulse IT for her incredible support. And big thanks to everybody, all you out there listening to this show. We love you. We appreciate you. If you haven't had an opportunity to subscribe, follow, rate us, recommend us to a friend, you know what to do. Thank you. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We love to hear from you.